Welcome to another Boba Joe show.
Hello. Hope everybody's keeping well. You ready to light up somebody's chest with a chop?
Chop, chop.
What are we talking about today? We got a video game chat on the go here.
Yeah, we're going to talk about wrestling video games of through the ages, any favorites, any stuff, any good memories, things that are fun to play, things that are not so fun to play in some cases. But yeah, there's been a lot of wrestling video games over the years, and I've had kind of times in my life where I played a little bit and then nothing for years and then a bit more, and they're kind of much larger gaps than other types of video games that I've played. Other types of games I've played constantly throughout my life.
Yeah, I've played a lot of wrestling games, not near as many as actually exist because there is a ton of wrestling games out there. I kind of started off like most people, kind of pretty casual about it. I had a couple of early rentals from my Sega Mega Drive back in the day. And then later on, as we got into the PlayStation era of gaming, is when I started to get a little bit more immersed in the wrestling games. I was a fan of the N64 ones as well, which were right around the same time. But we'll get to chatting about all that stuff today and good old world of pro wrestling in video games.
Yeah, I'll jump back in time briefly, just to kind of talk about just little fun facts and things I was learning earlier. In addition to games I've actually played a long time years ago on home consoles and arcades, like the first wrestling video game I remember playing a little bit of an arcade. I didn't know what the name of it was for several decades. I only finally found out a few weeks ago because I was looking up lots of retrospective videos on YouTube, particularly like 80s wrestling games, but most of them covered the console games and not a lot of them covered arcade games, other than the two big WWF ones everyone knows about, which were both awesome and all mentioned. But nobody mentioned this game, and it wasn't uncommon. It was an arcade made by Taito, but I just couldn't find it for years and years. So I finally found the bloody name. I was able to look up a video and actually see some footage, because I just remembered what it sounded like and how it felt to play. I remember there was like a Andre the Giant clone in it. There was a Tiger Mask clone, except the color was a black or Puerto Rican looking dude, but it was Tiger Mask and he did the giant swing. And I just remember it had really cool graphics and it played really well. But it was like 1989 and it had a real bland, I think it's just called something like Championship Wrestling or Champion Wrestler. It's a real generic name. I don't know what the Japanese name is. But I chucked in a couple of quick images here just because it took forever for me to find the bloody thing. But check out, see the guy on the bottom there called Black Machine. He's got the Tiger Mask. The guy on the bottom left's called Nitro Panks. He kind of looks like a bit like a what do you call it? The Hawk and Animal kind of guy. He's got the face paint and mohawk. The guy called Miracle Rastan. When you see him in the game, he pretty much looks like Lex Luger. He's got all the muscles. The Samurai kind of looks like he kind of looks like a mix of different guys, but to me, being this game was in 1989, he's looking kind of like the Dragon. Yeah, and some of the other guys look like kind of mishmashes, like amalgams of different wrestlers. But check out, it has a really cool attract screen when it plays like the demo and all that. But check out this image here and the profile. Big Giant of the Alps, Matterhorn Decker, weird name, but Big Giant of the Alps. That kind of tips you off. Plus the fact, look at him, he's giant sized. He's got the big over the shoulder strap. Probably he looks like Andre the Giant's body, but kind of the face of Kylie or something. The face is weird looking.
Yeah, billed at 7 feet 31 inches.
Yeah, 523 pounds. Just that weight alone tells you, well, it's got to be. Even though it's always
3 inches. I said 31 inches. Yeah, 3 inches. Yeah, he's not colossal. Yeah, no, there's definitely an Andre inspired deal going on here for the Big Giant of the Alps.
A bit musclier though, a bit more in condition than Andre would have been at this point. But yeah, this was a really good looking game. It was 1989 Taito, and it had you could play 2-player and all that. but it had like really nice animations, and it just played really well for the time. Like, I mean, games kind of, you got a gap from about 85. There's kind of a game before this. It was almost like a kind of redo or sequel to one I did years earlier. But you got some games from Taito and Sega in 85 that are actually quite good in the arcade versions, that some of which didn't get home console ones, some of which did get home ports that look completely different, look a bit crap. And then you got a big gap of 4 or 5 years. You got really good games, bunch of rubbish at home, couple more good games, some more rubbish, and then eventually we get some like more technical, better games, whether Japanese or Western or any releases, but a lot of rubbish ones, but like quite a few good ones as well. But you kind of get these big years in between where you think, oh, wrestling games must have not really got that great till 99, 2000. Like, no, Fire Pro Wrestling was going for a long, long time. That was probably the most technical one. Jerkomania 2000, we can give that one a miss. Don't even be playing that game. But yeah, the other cool little factoid I was talking about earlier, this game, Pro Wrestling, the Mega cartridge on the Sega Master System, just probably one of the worst covers of any video game in existence. But also slightly surreal, this wrestler who's like decapitated like the Headless Horseman, and he's like headlocking his own head. It's so bizarre. Or it's meant to be 2 disembodied heads. I don't know if it's meant to be an invisible body on the other guy. Abstract fucking art on this. But this was like a home conversion that was like real super simple with little South Park looking circle characters. It looked pretty rubbish. Didn't play terribly well, but the original version, which I've never seen, was an arcade game from Sega that actually looks really good. And in the West, all the characters were changed to, you know, kind of generic characters, so they weren't using licensed names or anything. But in Japan, the original version was an all-female wrestling video game with nice graphics. It played well, good animations, and all real wrestlers in it, like all proper wrestlers. So it was actually a real example of a really good game in one version in arcades, but at home it was like, well, it's playable. It's probably fun on 2 players, but it's not a good example of like home console wrestling. And that's my kind of early memories of seeing stuff like, I'd go to the rental shop and it's like they've got, I don't know, Teddy Boy and Wonder Boy, and they've got this pro wrestling. It's like, what sad sack do I want to take home and play for a weekend?
It'd be possibly one of the worst covers in the history of games.
Yeah,
like it's
I've
very,
seen a
very
lot of those
poor.
Master System European covers. The Japan has proper real art. Europe, this was a European thing, all these weird covers.
It looks like a drawing you'd see in a satirical political cartoon or
It does
something like that in a
actually.
newspaper.
Newspaper.
Yeah, very poor, very poor. I'd much rather, you know, a nice still shot of Ric Flair putting a sleeper on Hulk Hogan.
Like how much better
out.
it would be just even the cover, even if it weren't in it, just put that on the cover.
Yeah. Or just any type of, you know, free for all, you know, photo of like unknown pro wrestlers doing something like that.
Yeah.
Just, the cartoon
Well,
of
it's up there with that
the
legendary.
disembodied head.
It's up there with that legendary Mega Man NES cover where it's got that crazy going like this,
Yeah.
or the Strider where it takes a Japanese ninja, and because these poor artists just get outsourced and told draw this thing, they never see the game and know anything about it in this era. But Strider on the, I think it was Master System Mega Drive version, has it's Captain Kirk. It's William Shatner doing a Buck Rogers pose in the tight spandex pants. So that's meant to be Strider for the American audience, but he's a fucking Japanese ninja, like an anime ninja.
Yeah, some real deep thinking going on with those cover choices.
Yeah. But yeah, there was these early cool games back in the arcades in the 80s, and there was stuff even way back in 1982, 85, right through 89. There's quite a few different ones from Sega and Taito and other companies. Like you've got Tag Team Wrestling in 1983, excuse me, Mania in 85, Pro Wrestling on the NES in 86, which is different from the Master System. Tag Team Muscle based on like Kinnikuman in 86 on the NES. And then you got Fire Pro Wrestling, various versions. And then you got weird stuff like Sergeant Slaughter's Mat Wars 1989 on the Commodore 64. That's a very strange game. It's not a particularly good game. And it's almost like, it's more like, you know, you go to the old, we used to go to the old video rental store or VHS and then later DVDs. You would sit now and then you'd see some like crazy, like Asian action movie and it would say Tarantino presents. And you think, oh, this might be something cool. and he's like nothing to do with it. They just slapped his name on the top, and he said, "Oh, I like that." I gave it a thumbs up. Wasn't even a producer. Pretty much, this Sergeant Slaughter's Map Wars is this sort of thing. It's just a very generic game. It's like it's impressive for a Commodore 64 game, but it's not something that's terribly fun to play. It's just kind of a oddity, really, in the history of wrestling games that he got this own kind of sponsored one. But there was heaps of cool stuff on the NES and Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. That's when we started getting loads more home console. There was home console ones, conversions of the arcade games, but then we got loads of original games, some of which were fairly crap, some of which were quite fun. Like, did you get to play? This is just a smorgasbord of random pictures I chucked on here, but of the sort of like 8-bit and 16-bit eras, any kind of stuff you got to play there, or stuff you liked or didn't like, or
So a couple of these, I had a Game Boy for a while. I was able to play that, like the Game Boy version of that SteelCade, the Challenge. I played the SNES Super WrestleMania a little bit as well. But on this kind of, I suppose, this era of games we're seeing here, I would have only mainly known them from seeing the covers in the rental shop. I just didn't get around to playing a lot of them. Just because of the competition
in the all the time, like Spider-Man comics. I'd see these ads for all these games. Oh man, I want to play this, but only like my friend, who was a big wrestling fan, like pretty much all his life, and before I was really into it, he would occasionally rent stuff. So if I was at his house on the weekend, he might have one of those Genesis ones, like I don't know if it was like Rumble or Mania, but it would I remember the cast would have, like, at the time, it would have like Diesel, Doink the Clown, possibly Luger, like kind of 93 kind of roster of WWF.
I got you, yeah. Like, one thing I'll say about this entire era, from pretty much the get-go up until we go into the kind of PlayStation 1 and N64 era, a lot of the kind of 2D arcadey wrestling games, they are more or less typical beat 'em up games that just happen to take place in a wrestling ring, and you'll see a few wrestling moves in it. For the most part, though, it's like, character versus character. You got an energy bar, and you're just knocking the shit out of your opponent until you can, instead of KOing them, they might just have a pinning animation, is like the main kind of difference to signify that it's a wrestling game as opposed to your typical fighting game. But for the most part, that's what it felt like to me. Like, one game I played a lot of, not so much the Super WrestleMania on the Super Nintendo, but there was it might have just been called like WrestleMania the arcade game, but they also did a Sega Genesis / Sega Mega Drive.
Yeah, that's in the background there, that big arcade machine, the Midway.
The Midway one. I was just about to say, so it's the Midway developers, so it's a Mortal Kombat.
It's like Mortal Kombat, but wrestling.
Yeah, and like, man, for years, a good friend of mine, Connell, had that game. We would go round to his house and just play the absolute bollocks out of it. I loved it.
Yeah,
I just
played
loved the
heaps
whole
of that one on
idea.
SNES.
Just being able to do Mortal Kombat style fighting in the confines.
And then
it
had the combos from Killer Instinct, the big crazy combos on it.
One thing it didn't have is blood. They obviously wanted to keep it,
It had kind of like
family friendly.
sweaty stuff in it.
Yeah, you see weird things, but like, it's totally insane. Like, because you got Shawn Michaels.
Undertaker was smashed with actual tombstones on your head.
Yeah, but actual
and
tombstones.
You can fire out like actual spirits, like a projectile, like Shang Tsung firing the souls out of Mortal Kombat.
Shawn Michaels literally pull a baseball bat out of his tights, and whack you on the head.
And
the best one.
They did a sequel to it. It was called In Your House, but it wasn't very good. It didn't play as good, and it just wasn't. It was the same game, but just different roster. But it wasn't probably because it was mostly on PlayStation and Saturn, so it had terrible load times. Whereas if you played it on the Super Nintendo for WWF Arcade, there was no load time, so you're missing characters, but it's played a lot better because it was faster.
Yeah, well, I will get on to In Your House in a moment. My favorite thing about the WrestleMania animations or special moves was, if you're playing as Razor Ramon, his arms turn into actual razors when chops, which I always thought was deadly. On the subject of the In Your House game, I'm pretty sure I remember reading not so long ago. This when it was released on the PlayStation, apparently Sony were like, they went back to Midway and were like, you can't keep on releasing these these 2D games on this hardware. Like we want some like 3D stuff happening. Like, you know, I think it got fairly panned at the time because it was released in like
And
95,
it didn't get an
96.
arcade game either. It was just on PlayStation, Saturn. It says it was also on like home PC as well. But it was a direct
Yeah, I
sequel
think
to
it
the
was.
other arcade game.
It just felt like probably a bit of a letdown during that time where, remember, we all went through that brief phase in the mid-90s where all of a sudden the 2D stuff seemed so passe and
Yeah,
not
there were
with
still
the
good
times.
2D games coming out of Japan, like JRPGs and that. But in the West, yeah, they were like trying to push out 3D everything.
So yeah, in your house, I think landed Midway in a bit of hot water with that. But you know, Midway, that's we have kind of spoke about them in the past when we were chatting about,
Yeah,
you know,
Mortal
Mortal
Talks and that.
Kombat. They were
But yeah, like Image and
quite
Mortal
the
Kombat
company.
and that wrestling game, they were like great fun and people liked them. But that Fallout in your house was like, oh.
Yeah, like I knew a lot of people who enjoyed that WrestleMania arcade game. It was just a popular game.
It was like
For the
NBA
time.
Jam. Like you couldn't pay me to play actual sports games like baseball or soccer or basketball. But NBA Jam was awesome. I love that game. I still happily play that now. And I've never watched basketball. I've got no interest in playing basketball or basketball video games. But it's such a good game. It's like I don't know, like what Nintendo does, like a Mario Golf or something that gets to people who don't even care about golf. They just play it because it's a video game.
There was another one I played before. Actually, seeing that Steel Cage Challenge cover reminded me of it. It was WWF Rage in the Cage. I actually played that before WrestleMania. I
Did a
think
heap of Game Boy and NES and Super Nintendo was. And a lot of
Did you
ports
ever
back
play
and forth.
that Super Bowl cover looks pretty cool with Flair, Sting, and Vader. Did you ever play that game?
Yeah, it's nice. And you look on the back, you get bloody Johnny B. Bad on the back. His claim to fame on the video game cover.
Yeah, I love these old covers. Cool seeing the Road Warriors on the cover for that World Championship.
Yeah, I saw that image
title.
was used a lot because they advertised that in the comic books, but in the comic book version, they put almost like a filter over that where it was done like in comic art, but it's actually just that photo with some kind of like someone's traced over it or whatever. And I saw that heaps and like so many Marvel comics in the 80s.
It's one of those things as well. I'd say if you're an actual active wrestler at the time, it's probably pretty cool to see yourself immortalized in 8-bit or 16-bit as this this sprite on the screen.
I don't know who's been the most in games, like with all the modern 2K games and WWE, like because that's become a yearly thing, like the sports games. Obviously, there's certain people in a lot of games, but before that, if you go back 40 or 2000, I think the people in the most video games would actually be the Road Warriors because they're in WWF games, they're in WCW games, but they're also in the Fire Pro Wrestling series, and they're also in some independent games where, like that arcade game I looked at earlier, was a knockoff Andre and a knockoff Tiger Mask. They're in some Indian third-party kind of games, but it's actually them and it is licensed.
And if you want to talk, knockoffs or
they
maybe
were in that,
unofficial.
They did like an unofficial WrestleFest remake for like PlayStation Network and like modern consoles and PC and all that, and they're in that one, and it was all like not any of the big main wrestlers, but they were in it.
And even guys like, say Andre and these guys, they may not be Andre the Giant, but it's clearly supposed to be Andre the Giant, and he's appearing in shitload. Anytime you have a wrestling game, you have a giant guy, and he's going to be like an Andre the Giant clone, pretty much, even if you can't say his name. But in terms, I wonder who has the record for the most official in-game appearances. That would be
I
an
think it might be the
interesting
Road Warriors. Like as far as this era, 80s and 90s, say it then. But when you go post that, it'll probably by default, if you just went, there's been 20 years of those 2K games, it's probably fucking Roman Reigns or something, just because he's
or John Cena or somebody like that.
Yeah, just because they've beat it every other year.
Everything though changes when we begin to move out of that, you know, Sega, Nintendo 16-bit era. Like once we get into PS1 and N64,
Yeah, it's like
3D graphics
Warzone,
and memory.
Attitude, SmackDown, and then SmackDown is basically what the game series became that's still running now. Like, as far as being
Yeah,
like Ukes, there was a Japanese developer and all that, and what became the 2K games
SmackDown.
later on.
Yeah, SmackDown became Raw versus SmackDown, which then became 2K.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but yeah,
I
even
hate the
going back,
names of those
like,
fucking 2K games because it's just the publisher and a company. It means nothing. They do basketball and sports games, but calling it 2K this and that, it's like fucking just a nonsensical name. Like they don't have any names anymore for wrestling games.
two massive game changers, I think, for the PlayStation and the 64 era of wrestling games are, the first thing is having actual entrances for wrestlers. That made a massive fucking
Yeah, that
difference.
was cool.
You know, especially if you're actually going for, you want this to feel like a wrestling event, having the wrestler come out to the
And some
ring
of the
with
music,
his entrance music. Yeah, perfect. That
because
was a
you
major game changer. Second
yeah, we
big
had more
game changer.
data and space. Like PlayStation had your CD-ROM, so you could put a lot more audio on. N64 could still do decent music, but you know, compressed and all that. But it was decent. Like I played a lot of Attitude and Warzone, and but probably because I got to play with my friend who was into fighting games. We'd play Street Fighter, King of Fighters, Last Blade, anything like Capcom and Neo Geo stuff. We'd play all them, and but we'd play wrestling because it was to us it was just like another fighting game. It's another thing we can play on two players, and we'd play them like quite a lot. And the audio was fun too. And the PlayStation ones, you would get the voice of like Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross and stuff doing like, or sometimes like Man on the commentary. It was just sound bites, so it got repetitive, but it was still cool hearing the actual voices. And as well as taunts, you could have like Stone Cold flipping the birds in the ring to your opponent. And then those Nintendo ones were really good too, like WCW versus NWO and all that. And they were more blocky looking, but more technical and more refined, being Japanese games that they reskinned for, you know, and put, you know, American wrestlers instead of Japanese wrestlers.
Well, second big game changer had to be the ability to create your own
Yeah,
wrestlers,
the
create
custom
your own
characters.
attires. That fueled my teenage years, really. That's what I played the most, was games like, you know, you'd be playing No Mercy and you could make up any wrestler from any era, and you could do it in such a way that by the graphics of the time, you could actually make, you know, pretty decent looking characters that looked as good as the assets that were already built into the game. And then later on, as the SmackDown games progressed, like, you know, especially when we get to the PlayStation 2 era of games, I remember,
Yeah,
like, I
the
spent so many
custom stuff got
hours.
amazing.
Oh,
I
unbelievable.
like,
Like, I was playing SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain, like hours and hours a day. I would be, if my friends weren't around to play, you know, 1v1 or tag team or whatever, I'd be just spending time creating wrestlers and, you know, making up my own characters. The Shoro dog, that was my wrestling, you know, gimmick and stuff. You know, we make up all your friends, and, you know, you'd have these big like Royal Rumbles and stuff like that. It was just a great time to be a wrestling fan and to have access to these wrestling games to do all that stuff.
yeah, I noticed in a lot of those games too that would have the custom modes, they would put in stuff that was nothing to do with wrestling. Well, they got away with like lucha libre style masks, but in so many games, for no particular reason, there's bloody Spider-Man costumes in there, so you can make your own Spider-Man, but get
Yeah, and they
around the
do it.
licensing part of it.
Sometimes it won't be done in the most obvious way, but you can do it in such a way, like, so in your creator wrestler, you might just have a pair of eyes that look suspiciously similar to the
Yeah,
eyes in Spider-Man's mask. So like that's one layer, but then you have to go and find, like, say, a red mask that goes over that, and then you put the eyes on top, and then you get the, like, you know,
yeah,
they wouldn't make it really obvious that, oh, look, here's a Spider-Man costume in the game, but all the pieces are hidden there for you to put together and
yeah.
make your own
It was
Spider-Man
fun.
costume.
We used to do like we'd make a Spider-Man, and on the earlier games, the body types weren't fantastic. When we got to sort of PS2, PS3, and like your wrestling and Saints Row, they started having like adjustable bodies where you could make them thin and fat and all that. But the older games, it was just like, you know, about three stock bodies. So try and get a good Hulk, you just end up with a fat sumo wrestler. So we'd make She-Hulk instead and just make maximum muscle and tall as you get, give them long hair and make a decent She-Hulk, and you have like She-Hulk versus Spider-Man.
I played so many of those PS1 era wrestling games because around that time I would have had my PlayStation chip, so I was able to get like pirate games and import
Yeah.
games, very cheap. And yeah, like you mentioned earlier, we WWF Warzone, WWF Attitude. There was also WCW Nitro and WCW
Yeah, there was 2 or
Mayhem,
3
WCW
WCW ones,
Backstage Assaults. Yeah,
and
loads
they
of
had
them,
weird
just loads of them.
cheats in them where you could get like a bloody zoot suit guy and they like do like dances and stuff in it.
Yeah, they were just really deep games. Like I remember when the first SmackDown game came out and it had like season mode, and that seemed like such a big deal. And I think even like WWF Attitude and Warzone had something similar where
Yeah,
you
they were like
just
a
play
career
through
mode.
career mode essentially. And these days that's all kind of just your standard wrestling game fodder. But like back then it felt like a big deal. It's like, wow, I'm going to play through this full year of
Yeah.
wrestling matches, and I'll do
I
my
don't have to
3
watch all
shows
the
a week or
cutscenes and
whatever.
crazy backstage stuff. They turn them. Some of the later ones are almost more like role playing games than wrestling games. There's so
Yeah,
much just dialogue and stuff before we even get to do any wrestling.
yeah, and as they got kind of more modernized and advanced, it would become almost like you have to choose your path. Are you going to be a villain? Are you going to be a hero? Are you going to align with
Yeah,
this guy? Are you going to align with that
I
guy?
want to press the
It
button
became
and
more
smash someone
intricate.
in the face with a chair as quick as possible, not see all these scenes of dialogue and text.
And like they've evolved. Like I don't really own any modern wrestling games. That might change now that I have a new
Yeah, I picked
PlayStation
up
on the
one the
go.
other
But
day. It was one of those 2K ones, but it's from years ago. It's the one that had Stone Cold on the cover because it was cheap on eBay, and it's meant to have like iconic matches and stuff in it. But I loaded up the other night and I went to play it, and it starts playing the actual video clips from the King of the Ring Stone Cold versus Jake the Snake. So it's kind of cool. You're doing the thematic iconic match from where where he beats Jake and does that promo. But instead of doing just the entrance, it plays some actual video clips from the actual show that are a little bit sketchy looking. They're not the best resolution. I thought that's cool. But then they're playing the audio of like Jim Ross and Lawler. I'm going, oh, that's cool. But I'm was listening to it going, well, it's not dynamic audio to do with the match. It's just canned clips from the actual show. So it's kind of weird. It's like a hybrid of the video game and the show mishmashed together. So it looks really nice, but it threw me off a bit.
yeah, and they try to get you as the player to like recreate those moments. So
Yeah,
if
that was
you're
a cool
if you're
idea because
doing
there's
like
other
a
iconic
famous,
matches in there too.
it can be kind of difficult though sometimes because it's not just about though you going out saying necessarily winning a match. You have to make sure that the
I
match
lost it
ends
3
the same way
times.
it did.
I turned it off.
Yeah, yeah, you have to get
So that's
the
the way
the
to
finish
play it.
exactly right. But yeah, they've made them like a lot more intricate with their season modes and story modes as
Yeah.
it's come along.
The
But I do
controls
think
have
that
gotten
the
very complicated too. Like I prefer the more arcadey style ones that are more similar to fighting games with basic inputs. When it gets like to roll this here and press this and down to the corner in shops and buy a drink and come back and press the button again and then they do a thing. It takes a bit too long for me. I want to be able to press the button and do a thing.
yeah with the WWE, with the 2K kind of era of games, they went through a phase of including mini games within the game. So yeah, like you said, you go to lock up with your opponent, and
Yeah.
instead of just doing a move, it's like now press triangle, now press circle, and he
Yeah.
has time to counter
And
and stuff. And it
I'm not against that sort of stuff. It's just the way they implement it gets a bit to me. It's a bit unintuitive. They did some good versions of that stuff way back in the 80s in some of those Japanese games in a way that makes sense and the inputs are good and they're really responsive. And I feel like when I play some of the modern ones, I always end up doing what I don't want to do in the game. Of like I'm trying to body slam a guy, I end up running to the other side of the ring or accidentally jumping out of the ring and shit.
I know, like I'm showing my age a bit, but like I know a lot of people who were of the era and who played the game. But SmackDown Here Comes the Pain from
Yeah.
2004. Like that's an excellent gaming system. It's a very easy to pick up type of play style. You've got one button to block grapples, one button to block strikes, and it's almost up to
Yeah, it
you
was
to
a nice,
kind of
simple control
guess.
scheme.
Yeah, you just have to guess: is he going to hit me with a punch or a kick, or is he going to try and grab me? That's what you always had to be kind
And
of
when did it
aware of
still
in
have
order to
the
block a move.
did it still have the bar from the previous 2 SmackDowns where like it charged up, and when you were dizzy, you could press the button to do the finish, usually like L1 or
Do the
something to do the
finisher,
finisher?
yeah. And you
Yeah,
could
that was a good
your
system. It was
bar
a hybrid of
your
like
bar would build up.
sporty and arcade.
Yeah, yeah, that's you nailed it. You nailed it because they caught that balance just right between it's like an arcade style beat 'em up, but it's also realistic to somewhat to what pro wrestling
Yeah.
actually is and
It's
how
like
it
I
moves and
don't
how it
like
feels.
golf video games, but it's like there's lots of good golf video games, including old ones. But a good golf video game has simple mechanics that anyone can get into, but it's got the depth if you actually keep playing and get better at it. And
You had like a massive roster at the time as well, so a lot of
yeah,
just big stars that you're watching on TV were all included in the game. And because it did have such a good creator wrestler suite, anybody who wasn't in the game, you could just go and make them up for yourself anyway.
and I
And
remember
one
that came
thing,
out, that Here Comes the Pain. You'd see that and go, "Whoa, they look so realistic." But now you look back at those PlayStation 2 ones and go, "Oh, it's a bit janky now." Then
it's
you look at the ones they
simple.
got now, and well, if you watch the wrestling now on bloody Netflix, it's on. Sometimes they play ads for the modern games during the wrestling, and if you're not paying attention, just looking from a distance, you don't know it's the game. It looks like the
Yeah,
actual show.
it's so heavily produced now that it's
Mm,
getting hard to distinguish between the two. Everything's so polished and shiny.
yeah,
It could be like CGI graphics, even though you're watching something that's real
yeah.
or worse maybe in this case. But yeah, like and I know, even like I said, I don't own any modern wrestling games, but I do know from just friends who still would play regularly that one of the big things these days is when you buy a new wrestling game, apart from creating wrestlers yourselves, now you can also just go online and download other people's creations. So if there's somebody really
That's a good
talented
feature.
out there, yeah, who's made, oh well, 123 Kid isn't in the game, but you can just go and download one that somebody else made for you, and he looks great. He
That's
has
a
the
massive
perfect
time
move set and
saver.
all that stuff. It's so it's such a cool thing to be able to do. And there was some games they even released some of those 2K games on, like, around Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 era, where you could, on the 360 at least, you could actually take music from a USB or music from a CD, put it onto the hard drive of your Xbox, and then play it as your entrance music in a wrestling game, which was pretty
Oh,
cool
nice.
that they actually allowed you to do that. Of course, once online gaming became
Yeah,
a lot more prevalent, they put a stop to that pretty damn quick.
yeah. You can't
Can't have
enjoy
our
have fun
copyright.
at home. You can't do
Yeah,
things used to be able to do on PCs for years and years. Now we've got online. We've got to make sure people can't enjoy themselves.
yeah. I think one of the WWE games for a while, they like switched off entrance music or something like that for online games, so they wouldn't get sued for copyright
Wow.
or any other crazy shit that would play. Because people were probably recording audio files of all sorts of crazy shit just so they could come out to the ring to. Be fun times though. You
But yeah.
what's the most recent wrestling game you played? 2K14? I think mine was
Oh,
like
well.
15.
Oh, the one. Hang on. Look, two. Oh, I know. Cat. I was going to say I'll grab the other, but the cat's asleep. No, actually, I put it in this drawer next to me. I can grab it out because I was organising my game. So I'll see what year it says on it.
I'm intrigued to see what it is. I'm pretty sure, yeah, 15 like was mine, and like 15's back in 10 years ago now. So I'm really out of the loop in terms of actually owning any wrestling games. Like, if it wasn't for my mates still playing them, I probably wouldn't really have any idea what's been going on. From what I can see, though, it just seems to be like continuously improving the graphics, making everything more realistic, and just tightening up the controls a bit. Though, in my opinion, you'll still never beat
Yeah,
those Here Comes
you
the
get
Pain controls.
incremental improvements, but to me, the whole 2K era of wrestling stuff. I mean, fantastic animations and all that sort of thing, presentation through the roof, but they're kind of like creatively a bit dead, and you go online and look at reviews and forums, and they'll say, well, this one's really good, this one's rubbish, and there's some that are just like completely glitched out and were useless for like 6 months until they patch them, and it becomes like all the basketball, baseball, or Assassin's Creed games where they're just like, we're going to crap another one out every year, whether it's good or not doesn't matter. We're just going to keep shoveling them out the chute. And so there are good ones, but there's also ones that need massive patches and updates to work, or the roster's not very good or whatever. But yeah, this is the one I got in from eBay this week, 2K16, because it was $20 and it's got Stone Cold on there. So
yeah, you're a year ahead of me. You know, you're a little bit more modern.
But that's the only one I've played since like SmackDown 2 or whatever.
Oh, those first couple of SmackDown games for PlayStation 1 were so fun, and they were still kind of, even though they were in 3D, they were still hanging on to those kind of old 2D fighting game mechanics. Because in the first SmackDown game, you can still win a match by knockout just by hitting someone with a move and just like
that's
you
true.
kill them.
I used to like in the like the Warzone and Attitude were pretty basic games, but I like the mechanics in it. They're easy to play, control, and I used to like beating the hell up out of the opponent and like throwing them out of the ring and pushing them out and getting a count out. And I got good enough. I could consistently make them get counted out, like, and win the match that way just for the fun of it. Because I just like beating them rather than pitting them. But I can't do that in most other games. Like, I mean, you can sometimes you can, but I just can't get it to work, or they get up too fast. And
I remember with WCW Nitro on the PlayStation 1 had this really cool feature where you've only 20 characters or like 20 wrestlers you can actually pick from, but when you're picking your character, if you press circle under icon, it will actually play like a short 30-second
little video
FMV.
clips.
You've them doing
Before
a little
you see the crazy weird polygonal chest going around like everybody's
Ric
Buff
Flair.
Bagwell on that game, or Steiner. They're all like, "Argh."
Oh, it was great though. Like, yeah, you got a Ric Flair promo before the match and stuff. Yeah, and plus a nice show off.
My mate who liked WCW did have a copy of that at some point, and he liked WCW better and had that on PlayStation.
The game itself was pretty ropey, but that was a nice feature to have in a game.
They're like, even the ones that are a bit janky in the era were still quite fun on 2 players to mess around on. And some were like decently made, some were not so great, but just still fun to mess about 2 players.
Yeah, and I think I do have memories of connecting up the old multi-tap. Remember the multi-tap if you had a PlayStation, and you could do like 4 players and 2-on-2 tags, or you know, if you had 2 multi-taps, you could do like a 6-man tag.
Yeah, that's cool if you'd actually have like proper 4-player 2-on-2 tags and that. And like, so there are some of the games that were just like a bit dodgy and not the best on 1 player, but some of them were just like so bad that you play on 2 players that's like funny, and it's part of the tape was laughing at how bad some of those were.
And like, just it's nice kind of having the ability to completely like take the piss when it comes to like what you can create within the games. Like if you do want to make like just like a ridiculous character,
like weird, like you could go through the whole standard color palette of like, you know, like your MS Paint colors or whatever, and get any kind of skin color you want. Never mind human beings, like any like aliens, like green skin and stuff, and all kinds of weird tones and pink, and just make real bizarre looking characters, or make ones with like all sorts of strange clothes and outfits and giant hats, and have everything like completely clashing and looking like real bizarre.
With the old SmackDown games, sometimes what I used to like to do would be to take like a real life wrestler who already existed and just go and change like his height to make him like, you know, a really short person, or change him to make him really tall, because they'd already have like the game assets there for you to mess around with. Like, so you could like get Stone Cold and The Rock and just turn them into little dwarfs, and then just like having them like wrestle each other and stuff.
And some of those really SmackDown ones, you'd have novelty costumes and faces. It got better as it went on, but I remember the first or second one had like a big T-Rex head. You could put on a big T-Rex head and put some like chaps, have like a cowboy with a big T-Rex head on it, like a oversized Halloween costume head.
And you do sometimes, like when you're watching these like online matches between players, like, and people will show up in the most ridiculous of gimmicks and attires for their character. But you know, that's part of the fun of it. You know, Jim Cornette
Yeah,
would not be pleased at a lot of these gimmicks that are
there's some
showing up.
fun videos on YouTube. We can see how good people have gotten with the custom characters and that. And you'll see it's like Godzilla versus Spider-Man versus Batman versus Predator or something. Like just like completely like things you wouldn't even think you could make in the game. People made some really awesome custom characters.
Like talking about these wrestling video games, and obviously they're, you know, in their purest and most, I suppose, even their most recent forms, they're trying to like perfectly emulate what wrestling is when you watch it on
Yeah, which
TV.
is fine.
What
I wish there was more variety of more. I wish they'd do some more arcade and cartoony looking stuff again.
what do you think though of the kind of reverse of that, where, because we know we're, you know, no secrets here, we
Yeah.
listen to like similar wrestling podcasts, and we kind of maybe have a bit of an old fogey's point of view sometimes on wrestling. But what do you think of the kind of concept of video games actually influencing how wrestling matches now are looking these days? Because that is something that people do say a lot. Oh, you know, so and so had a very video game style match. Like, what do you think of
Yeah,
that
I don't know. I don't
stylistically?
know how. I'd have to see a comparison of a thing to see what exactly they were talking about. I know on Jim Cornette and they talk about stuff like that, but it feels like, I mean, on the old corny podcast about video game stuff or even anime cosplay. If you say it's like someone went out and did like a cosplay match, that would kind of make sense to me. It's like, yeah, they weren't really wrestling; they were more doing something around wrestling. They were doing some kind of performance, but it was like just a bit weird.
I think a lot of what the influence is on it's when it comes to actually like selling moves or selling pain, because traditionally in wrestling, you know, you would be hit with a big move, you'd fall, you'd take your bump, and then you'd be like, you know, oh, I'm in pain, and that would carry on, you know, throughout the match if you got hit more in that spot or whatever. Whereas in a video game, you know, a lot of the time you hit a character, he just springs back up. You hit him again, he springs back up, and we
Right.
just keep
Yeah.
going until the game is over. And I think that's what you kind of see a little bit of,
Yeah, that's
maybe a lot
nonsense.
of.
Unless you're the Undertaker, that's just nonsense.
But
Anyone who's not him is
that's
not
what you
supposed to
get.
do that.
Because you get now though matches essentially where the two guys are like, you know, they're hitting each other with really what would be really powerful looking devastating moves, but they're getting up straight afterwards just to do the next move the way you would if you were playing a video game. You know, you take a move, then you give a move. You know, it's very kind of a simplistic, it's very action packed, but it's also maybe somewhat unrealistic, and if you want to use
So
the
like
word, kind of
everybody's a
phony
zombie
looking.
and takes no damage and just keeps going.
There is that element, you know.
Yeah.
You know, how do you take somebody out if, you know, if they're jumping up and bouncing up after these big powerful moves? Like, how can you actually
I
beat
don't
them?
watch AEW, but it just sounds like that when you're describing that. It sounds like AEW to me.
And like, to be fair, like, you know, some modern WWE you know, performers have been guilty of it as well.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not even really a video game influence. Maybe people just call it the video game match
Oh,
because that's the first thing they think of.
there's definitely like, I mean, if you look at people who are alive in wrestling now who are under 40, I mean, I'm 45, but people are under 40, under 30, people who are new coming up from, let's say anything 20 to 40, they've all grown up in an age of video games as opposed to the previous generations. Million Dollar Man wasn't playing no fucking video games. He wasn't down that. Well, there was a famous story one time where he's on holiday. He tells on his podcast where he walked up on a kid who was playing one of those that early wrestling arcade game, and he was standing behind him. And the kid turned around like, "Holy shit, it's a $1 Million Man!" And it was in the video game. But he was on holiday. He wasn't playing that game. Undertaker, like Undertaker guys like that, Hogan, go back to like 70s. Ric Flair weren't playing no fucking video games, and they weren't playing. I mean, maybe Ric Flair played Pac-Man. I don't know. I don't give a shit. But it's definitely video games are such a mass cultural medium thing that it's influenced everything globally. Like, you know, like as far as culture and media and that. So we can't say there's no influence, but like how much of an influence depends on, you know, there's definitely plenty of wrestlers now who are also people that play video games in their spare time, and they keep showing like even on the current Raw or whatever, occasionally you'll see like bloody Dirty Dom and their group and all that. They'll show whatever the current game is, but it's more just like in on show promotion than them really playing it. But it is part of the whole culture and thing.
Yeah. And I suppose,
I feel when wrestling's influenced more by actual martial arts and actual combat sports, but doing a flashier, showy performance version of it than a video game, which is like, it's like having fucking He-Man or Mortal Kombat or Ninja Turtles, like the comic book of the movie of the game of the thing, and it's like just this ouroboros of bullshit.
Well, like in Japan, you know, they don't shy away from the influence and the connection at all. Like in some of the most recent Tekken
but
games,
they've always been like
you
that
had
with
like
anime, manga, and all that.
Oh
and
yeah,
Tiger
yeah.
Mask and that sort of thing.
But even
I mean,
like
Tiger Mask was a comic, and it became a real wrestler.
Exactly. But even say, you know, Tekken 6, 7, those type of games, like they would have had like official New Japan Pro Wrestling, you know, logos and stuff in the game. Like, so there is an actual, like a real life relationship there. And even say like guys like Kenny Omega or, you know, in the past others have come out for big shows using actual like, you know, video game inspired entrances. Like I think Kenny Omega has come out for dressed as like Final
Mask
Fantasy
was in the third
characters and
Tiger
stuff.
Mask anime.
Exactly. But so yeah, there's definitely I suppose a crisscross and influence when it comes to the video games influencing
Japan's
wrestling
like
and
that. They're
wrestling
very different
influencing
though
the
than like
games.
to me than the rest of the world, because their comic book culture and the video game culture is embedded in like everything. It's normal for people. Well, it's not so much normal for adults to play games so much as it's more younger kids in that. Obviously some adults do. Whereas the manga and comic stuff, people of all ages reading bloody baseball manga and superhero manga and like bloody like Sailor Moon. You know, it's much more of an ordinary thing. Whereas in other parts in like America and all that, like it's just a certain nerd culture that does that, and other people not really interested in it.
There was a fair few kind of non WWE games that were released for the PlayStation 2 era, I remember, because when WWE bought WCW and kind of became the only player in town, no pun intended, I do remember there was a lot of like independently made wrestling games that would actually have official wrestlers in them that weren't working for WWE. Like I remember Hulk Hogan had a game called Legends of Wrestling where there was like
that was
Hulk
cool.
Hogan and Ultimate Warrior and all these 80s guys, and they were
I
able
have
to get
like
the
one
rights
of the
to use them.
sequels to that on Nintendo DS, and then it had you know, I don't think it had like, but it had like, it had all sorts of cool icons, and it would have like more kind of arcadey big finisher moves or the jump way up in the air and stuff. And
there was a backyard championship wrestling game.
Yeah, backyard wrestling. There's a couple of those. Even the cover of that was like real backyard. It's like some kid in Photoshop's done this. The covers were not great.
Lots of like rap crossover stuff as well. Like there was an Insane Clown Posse game. There was like a Def Jam wrestling game.
There was a Def Jam game. Def Jam kind of hybrid fighting wrestling game.
Yeah, it was a real Wild West there for a while with the stuff.
And there was another one I remember seeing in the shops. Some kind of like sexy girls one where it's just all lady, but it was like a Western one, but almost like Dead or Alive, but wrestling, and it was like girls wrestling. Or I feel I hear it. Rumble Roses. There we go. 2004.
Rumble Roses. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. And like that's one of those things, folks. Like, because I know we've been like bouncing around and like because like we both kind of mentioned at the start, like if you go on to even Wikipedia or Google and just like Google the list of professional wrestling video games up until now, it's insane the amount of
it's up to 66 games for like, and that's the ones they've listed on there. It's not everything, but it's ones they've listed.
Yeah. And look, I've maybe played like 20 different ones in my lifetime, maybe.
Well, I haven't got around to playing. There's that one, I'm looking at that because I have that list in the background here. I was looking at earlier to refresh my memory. 2021, they did Retromania Wrestling. I might actually download that this week because I never got around to it. That is an unofficial sequel / homage to the arcade WWF WrestleFest, which is the one that had like Earthquake and Sergeant Slaughter, and it had the big blue steel cage at the front, and you could play know it was 3 or 4 players. It was at least 3 players in arcade, depending on which machine was set up. But that was a really awesome arcade game. And there was 2 games. There was Superstars was one several years earlier, and then WrestleFest. But that Retro Mania Wrestling, that's like a 2D one that's like an homage to those games. So I'm glad they made that. And Legion of bloody Doom are in that game too again.
Yeah, and I'll kind of mention as an aside, because probably wouldn't come up otherwise, there is a text-based wrestling game that I have played for years and still will play at the odd time to this day. It's called Extreme Warfare, and you manage a wrestling company, and you're the CEO or whatever, and you pay the wrestlers, you book the matches, you try and sell out shows and get good pay-per-view buys. It's all very kind of business orientated, and it's totally text-based. And I play like an old version of the game, but there has been new releases of the game, since, that have really kind of upgraded and added extra layers of detail. But I will throw that out there. It's a free game if anybody wants to download it. Extreme Warfare,
cool.
created by a guy called Adam Rhineland.
I
Definitely worth checking out.
I made a video a year or 2 ago, just a short one. It was like a parody one. It was a fake trailer for like a wrestling RPG game. And I'm looking at this list here and I'm seeing there actually was a wrestling RPG called WrestleQuest in 2023 for like pretty much every platform. So I'm going to look up some videos for that later.
Yeah, could be something to check out. I would be curious though, just because, like I said, like we're given like a snapshot into the ones that we've played, and obviously we are, getting up there a little bit in age, so we may not be as up to speed. If we have anybody a little bit younger maybe listening who'd like to bring us up to speed on what else is out there apart from 2K in terms of being popular
there's
people
not a
play.
lot. Like there's like the 2 longest running games now are the 2K ones, which used to be the SmackDown Ukes series, which was a Japanese developer. Obviously it's become like more known as a Western thing with WWE/WWF. But like that game and Fire Pro are the 2 longest running wrestling game series. There's kind of a lack of variety now. Which it's like the old Monday Night Wars. Once that was over, and Vince bought out all the other stuff, there was kind of a lack of competition, and now it's so expensive to make games. You've either got to make super AAA shiny platform, 500 people dev team and 4 or 5 years to make it, and you might go bankrupt making one game, or you've got to make something real simple in 2D and put it on the the digital download networks or Steam or PSN and Xbox and all that. So there's not really much in between. So I wish there was a bit more variety, some more indie style games. I mean, there probably is, probably on Steam, I would imagine, which I'm not a PC gamer, but Steam, you've got Steam on computers and Steam Deck. There probably is some like random fucking indie games or some shit on there. There's people who do make smaller stuff, but I'm not aware of it.
Well, I'd love, if anybody knows, I'd love to hear from them. But also for people who are a little bit more of Johnny and I's vintage, or possibly even older, do let us know what classic wrestling games you played. Were you going way back to those Sergeant Slaughter's? What was that Sergeant Slaughter's game? Mat Wars?
Yeah,
were you playing Mat Wars?
I don't know if he's actually in the game. It's called Sergeant Slaughter's Mat Wars on Commodore 64. I don't know if he's actually even in the game. It's just like he presents the title sort of thing. You can look up long plays on YouTube.
I imagine it's the type of thing where Sergeant Slaughter is literally the only named wrestler in the game, and everybody else is like a generic.
It's a pretty generic game. There's actually, there's like other games too we haven't mentioned. Like there's, apart from like the quite good quality arcade games from like Taito and Sega in the 80s, there's other like efforts from like home computer micros in the UK. People doing like real bedroom coder type games have done the old wrestling game, and in America too for the PC. There's other much smaller, lesser known games. Like there's quite a, if you want to look them up, there is quite a bit of variety of stuff. I'm not saying whether good or bad, just they do exist outside of these big major brands and all that. The earlier wrestling games were less licensed ones and more just like, here's a wrestling game with a bunch of characters for an arcade, and then it became all licensed stuff. I'd like to see some more non-licensed stuff that was just like, here's a wrestling game that's like good core mechanics, and then never mind if it's got popular characters or not. That's the sort of thing that kind of interests me. And then you can always add on, you know, you can always do a sequel later on that's like a licensed thing or whatever. And
I did just think of another, what would have been a potentially big game to rival 2K, but then it kind of failed miserably, was the AEW Fight Forever game that came out a couple of years ago.
I've not played those. Like, I've seen them up at the shop, so I don't know. Didn't pay attention to which company made it or whatever.
Apparently it died on its arse within a few months of it being released. And these days, I think if you go online to try and play a game,
it's got to be because it's a small audience, not necessarily reflecting on the quality of the game.
It was probably a bit of a glitchy game as well, was the feeling I got from when it was released.
I just had a quick look to see who the developer was. It says the developer was SYXX, who made the original SmackDowns.
Yeah. I think it ran over time, it ran over budget, and then, you know, it couldn't live up to the hype. Ultimately, I think is what happened with that.
So basically, like watching actual AEW there. Yeah. That's a pretty good translation of video games. Doesn't live up to the hype. Runs over time.
As I talk about the AEW game, I'm then reminded of the TNA game that came out for the PlayStation 3 and 360, which actually wasn't the worst game. That was a decent enough game. It just
didn't know they made a game.
Catch fire. It was pretty good. But I would genuinely be curious if there's anybody out there listening today, like, what were your childhood favorites? Did you grow up in that 8-bit, 16-bit era, or did you come along a bit later and jump into the PS1 and N64?
I feel like the earliest arcade games and the 8-bit ones, some of them were more playable than some of the 16-bit ones. And they were just kind of faster and just like press a button, something happens. And when they were starting to get too many animations and are a bit slow and some of the systems, and then they got better again. And once we got PlayStation N64, they started getting like more faster paced ones with better animations in it.
Yeah, what is on the cards, or what are potential ideas?
Okay, so next week we're going to talk about, I don't know if I've got a thing in here or not. We're going to talk about I want to see the McManager. I know what I can do. I can just load the Instagram page because I know I posted the thumbnail on there. And I'll go share screen so I can see it on here. There we go. So next week we're doing Talking Trash and Calling Matches, Legendary Voices Wrestling. Okay, they talk about wrestling commentators pretty much of the like 80s and 90s.
Very much looking forward to that. And I know we are on the WrestleMania weekend. We haven't spoken about what happened at WrestleMania last night because we don't know. Tonight, yeah, we're gonna watch some. Probably should also mention, just in case people are into it, Happy Easter if that's what you're into. Happy 420 if that's what you're into. You know, whatever you're into. I hope you're having a good day, and I hope you're looking forward to hearing us talk about the greatest voices of wrestling next week.
Yeah. And this episode's kicking off at least several weeks of wrestling specials. We're going to talk about more stuff from probably from like 80s, early 90s, more wrestling stuff. We'll talk about some other wrestling events, some WCW, WWF, might talk about some WCCW, who knows, might throw out more funny letters and acronyms and who's get into some more classic stuff in upcoming weeks. And I've been watching in recent months, I've watched a whole heap of other stuff to kind of mentally prepare myself for what are the things we're going to talk about. Of course, a lot of things you've already seen, so I'm playing catch up. I'm just like seeing things for the first time that you've seen years ago or watched multiple times for some of them.
Well, folks, if you enjoy corny fakery, be sure to check back in with us over the next couple of weeks. You know, we'll be talking about the works and the workers that performed them.
Getting some brawl for alls and war to settle the scores. We'll be back again. Leave us a comment and like if you get a minute. It would be appreciated. And we'll catch you guys next time.
See you later, folks.